What's up guys? Motocross Action is here. We're at State Fair MX today and we have a fun video for you. We're putting up Dilan Schwartz race bike, his Bar X Suzuki 250 up against our bone stock RMZ 250 for 2021. It's gonna be a lot of fun riding these two bikes back to back here at State Fair. These are my favorite types of videos and favorite types of tests, when you take a bone stock bike and put it up against basically a works bike, something that has everything thrown at it to be as fast and as best handling as possible. So Dilan Schwartz has scored some awesome finishes on this RMZ 250 inside the top 10 during the 2021 outdoor season. The stock RMZ 250, it is the least like 250 in the class. It is the slowest on horsepower, it's the heaviest, it's the only bike that doesn't have a push button starter, so there's a lot that's going against it, but it's still a great price for the value that you get on the bike, and something that is interesting to talk about and interesting to ride. So we're excited to go back to back, head to head, stock versus mod, stock versus race bike today at State Fair. We're gonna do a lap time comparison, see how much faster I can go on Dilan Schwartz's race bike compared to the stock RMZ 250. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. Let's get into it. Today we did the test at State Fair and it was kind of the great equalizer. Riding on a track that's this tight and this technical, it actually wasn't as big of a difference to ride Dilan Schwartz's bike comparing it to a stock bike. So State Fair, straightaways are short, the corners are tight. It's not an all-out horsepower track. This isn't a track that you would be better off on a 450 than a 250. A lot of times a 250 would actually be better on this track than a 450 would. So with the track being a little more tight and technical, it was actually quite an equalizer between these two bikes. Still, Dilan Schwartz's bike was really fast. It was a lot of fun riding this thing today. The thing barks and it was just so much fun to rev it in the air, to rev it in the pits, and just to hear that FMF muffler working with that twisted development engine. And it's definitely impressive. Dilan Schwartz has scored impressive finishes on this bike during the outdoor national season. The one thing that really stood out to me my first laps on the track with Dilan Schwartz's bike is the suspension was stiff. He definitely runs his forks a lot stiffer than a lot of other bikes that I've ridden. I've ridden other factory bikes, had my own bikes built for the nationals as well. So Dilan Schwartz, he's a little guy, which made me expect he would have soft suspension, where I'm quite a bit heavier, quite a bit taller. But Dilan Schwartz's riding style versus mine is way different. He rides the front of the bike a bunch and he wants to have stiff forks. And talking to team manager Larry Brooks, he said that James Stewart was the same way. James Stewart was small and lightweight, but he loved having stiff forks. So interesting comparing that to our stock Suzuki 250. Side note, the Suzuki 250 that we brought here today, it's got a stock engine and most of the components are stock. However, we did soften up the valving on the forks, so that actually helped the bike today. Stock forks that come from Suzuki are pretty stiff off the showroom floor, so the softer forks actually helped us today. It helped us get into corners easier. So I had a lot of fun. We had 3 other test riders, Del Fonte and Ezra Lewis, going back to back between stock bike and mod bike today. And in this versus video, we're talking all about the details between these two bikes. So power definitely goes to Dilan Schwartz's bike. This thing has tons of power on the bottom and mid end of the bike, and it even over revs with lots of power as well. It was definitely impressive. Some of the stock bikes that I've been riding, like KTM 250, Kawasaki stock 250, those models are all the power's up top and you really have to rev it to get into the meat of the horsepower. Or Suzuki, Yamaha, and now the all new Honda for 2022, those guys are bottom end bikes where they make a lot of power off the initial crack of the throttle. This Suzuki 250, the mod bike that we rode today, it's just like that. Lots of power off the bottom end. As soon as you crack on the throttle, you can wheelie down the straightaway, wheelie over bumps and jumps. Hopping from that bike onto the stock RMZ 250, quite a big difference. Stock RMZ 250 is the slowest bike in the class, the heaviest bike in the class, and it was definitely noticeable on the track today. However, it didn't affect our lap time as much, and we'll get into that in a second. Comparing more about the suspension between these two bikes, it actually played a big factor in how the brakes worked. So as soon as I hopped on the track this morning, I came into some corners pretty hot, just trying to feel the power of the bike, and I crashed once and blew the turn multiple times. The track is tacky. It's got a lot of traction here at State Fair, especially this morning, and both the Dilan Schwartz race bike and MXA's test bike, both of them have bone stock brakes from Suzuki. So they're not the strongest brakes on the market. Brembo, the Ktm brakes are much stronger. That comes on KTM, Husky, and Gas. Even Yamaha and Kawasaki have done things to improve their brakes over recent years, especially Yamaha. They've done a few different things trying to make their brakes stronger and work better. But Suzuki brakes, I'm not a huge fan of. I was not very confident stopping these things, and it magnified it because of the fact that Dilan Schwartz has such stiff forks. So when you're coming into a corner, if the forks are riding high, the bike's not going to compress as much coming into the rut. It's not going to drop down and sink into the rut as easily. It's more going to ride higher, has less traction on the front tire. So Dilan Schwartz, he runs his forks actually flush with the triple clamps. They're as far down as possible. It's putting more weight on the rear end. The spring rate and the valving is definitely stiffer than what I would prefer. And so his riding style, it works for him. For me, it was causing me to push the front end a lot. And that's what actually was surprising about this test video, and what actually made the stock RMZ 250 that we rode actually better coming into corners today. The brakes were exactly the same, so we can't say that the brakes were better, but they felt so much better. So that's the funny thing that comes when you test motorcycles, is there's so many intricate details that work between the suspension, the tires, frame, and the engine, and all these come into factor on how the bike works overall. So I was struggling with the brakes, but it turns out it was really the suspension that was making it harder to stop coming into corners and harder to dive into ruts. So that was also a fun aspect of today. You hop on Dilan Schwartz's RMZ Suzuki 250, you think, this guy has scored impressive top 10 finishes on this bike. Man, this bike must be good. The bike must be amazing for me. Honestly, it wasn't a great bike for me. The engine was impressive. I was definitely impressed with what they were able to get out of the power, but the suspension was not good for me today here at State Fair. And that just goes to show that riders have different styles, different preferences, and just because I didn't like the forks doesn't mean they're bad. They're actually great for him, and he's able to beat multiple factory riders, passing guys coming through the pack. No matter what happened, he would crash multiple times in a moto and still finish in the top 10. So that just goes to show that different riders have setups that are built for them. Some are more traditional and some are off to the side. So Dilan Schwartz definitely has a unique setup on his RMZ 250, and that made it even closer when it came to the lap time battle. So let's get into the exciting stuff. Which bike was I faster on today? So getting into the lap time comparison, these are my favorite things to do in these MXA versus videos. It's awesome to just share with you guys the raw, hardcore lap times. The lap time, the stopwatch, it doesn't lie. And it was very interesting today. It was really surprising. So I spent the morning riding on Dilan Schwartz's bike, really getting comfortable on it. Went out there, set a lap time, and had a pretty good lap in there. I thought we were gonna be running well. Then I went out on our stock RMZ 250. I did 2 laps to warm up to it. This bike, like I mentioned already, has a little bit softer suspension than stock. Went all out on the bike. I didn't feel very fast, but my corners were pretty smooth. Part of that is that the bike was slower, so I had more time to set up for my corners and less of a chance to make a mistake. Came around, stopwatch. I expected to be faster on the Dilan Schwartz bike, but stopwatch doesn't lie. I was actually 2/10 faster on our bone stock RMZ 250. It was mind-blowing. You read all over the internet that the Suzukis are horrible bikes. Even walking around the pits, everybody pokes fun at the yellow bike and explains how heavy it is, how slow it is, and the Kickstarter instead of an electric starter. I mean, there's lots of controversy or people that point a finger at the RMZ 250, and honestly, the stock bike isn't too bad, especially once you get the suspension dialed in like we have here on our RMZ 250. So impressive. I beat my lap time on Dilan Schwartz's race bike on the stock bike by 2/10. I didn't expect that, and afterwards I had to go redeem myself. We had Larry Brooks, the BarX Suzuki team manager here. I had my old mechanic, Taylor Muto, who worked for me back in 2015. He was here with the bike. They had it all fresh for us today. I had to go redeem myself, do one more lap time for good measure. I was able to drop my lap time by another second on Dilan Schwartz's bike with my second chance. So it kind of goes against my rule for these versus videos. My rule is always you get one lap, that's your time, and it's over with. But I went against my rule. I bended it a little bit. I went out for a second lap time. I beat it, but it wasn't super pretty. There was a few corners where I found myself kind of off to the side of the bike because the forks are stiff. So that just goes to show that this bike is not set up for state fair. It's set up for AMA Nationals, where the bumps are massive, the ruts are deep, the straightaways are long, the jumps are big, 40 guys on the track. That's not what we were riding here at State Fair. This is a tight, technical track made for people who like to jump and like to have fun and deep ruts in the corners. So if I was riding this bike at Glen Helen compared to the stock Suzuki, I think I'd be seconds faster on Dilan Schwartz's bike. If I was riding it at Hangtown or Redbud or Southwick, any other national track, I would definitely be faster on his bike. But still fun to play all those variables and factors into our results today, and it provides good content for our YouTube channel and our videos. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you haven't seen it, we have a full, in-depth, detailed video on Dilan Schwartz's bike where I talk about all the parts that the BarX Suzuki team modified to make this bike what it is today. I go a little more in depth in detail about the team, the people behind it, and what they got going on. Also talk a little bit about Dilan Schwartz in that video. So if you haven't seen that yet, make sure to check that out. Also check out our website, motocrossactionmag.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see more MXA versus videos like this one, where we test 4 strokes against 2 strokes, factory bikes against stock bikes, and other production bikes against each other. So lots of fun in these videos. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.